Hey there everybody, it's Mike DiLisio, and today I'm going to be taking a look at fives. This is coming from designer Taiki Shinzawa, a very well-renowned Japanese trick-taking game designer. This is a re-implementation of a game called the Green Five-Wura, which was printed in very small numbers and not very readily available. And this is the first numbered box in 4 games that are starting this new Magenta line that publisher CMYK has introduced. So let's head over to the table. I'll let you know how it plays, then we'll come back here and I'll tell you what I think. Fives is a trick-taking card game made up of 4 different suits, each having 13 cards. 3 of the suits, the blue, the green, and the silver, have cards numbered 1 to 13. The silver suit is the trump suit, so it's always going to be of a higher rank than any other suit in the game, i.e. if a single trump card was played in a trick with cards of different suits, that trump card will win by default. The magenta suit is slightly different. Although it's made up of 13 cards, it has a 0, unlike the others, and it's missing a 5. The reason why it's missing a 5 is that essentially every card in the game can be a magenta 5 if it's played face down. So every single card in the deck has a magenta 5 on the back. And you'll see that there are some restrictions on how and when you can play those cards face down as a magenta 5, but just know one of the big hooks of the game is that every card can potentially be a magenta 5. Alright, here we see 5 set up for a 4-player game. At the beginning of the game, everyone's going to start with 5 point chips. You're going to be playing through 4 total rounds, and your goal at the end of the game, at the end of those 4 rounds, is to have the most of these point chips. It is a must-follow trick-taking game, which means that whatever the lead suit is must be followed by the players if they have one of those cards in their hand. If they do not, then they may have some other options. They can play any other card. So the way it's going to work is that whoever has the 0 in magenta suit will be the first player to lead out at the beginning of each of the 4 hands. Turns out that this player has that magenta 0, so they can play out whatever cards they want to begin the first trick. They do not have to play the magenta 0. So, looking at their cards, this player has a fair number of trump, which are the silver suit. They only have a couple of magenta here. So maybe what they'll do is they'll lead out a high number in another suit. Maybe they lead out this green 13. So this means that every other player has to follow that suit if they have it. And this player does. They're not going to be able to win that. So they'll go ahead and just play out a low. They'll get rid of one of their low green cards. This player will also be able to follow. They'll throw out maybe one of their low cards because it's early in the round. And this player also has green cards, but they decide they want to get rid of a high number. So they're going to actually throw out their 12. All right. In this case, the highest card of the lead suit was from the opening player. So they're going to take all of these cards as their trick. However, when you take a trick in this game, you are going to collect all the cards and place them in piles in front of you so that your winning card is at the very top. Okay? So this first player would take these cards, they would place them face up in front of them, and that has a value of 13. One of the hooks of the game is that you are trying to get as close to the number 25 as possible without going over after playing all of these cards. So this is a very high card to play for the first trick because now they don't have quite as much wiggle room. At the end of the hand, after all of the cards have been played, the player that is closest to 25 without going over is going to get 3 points from the kitty. And the player that is second closest will get 2, third closest would get 1. However, if any player busts, goes over the 25 amount, they have to pay a chip from their own personal supply to the player that got closest to 21. So, in this case, this player took a risk, played out a large card at the beginning, and they would lead the next trick. So, one of the other aspects of the game that is unique is that, as I said before, every card in the game has a magenta 5 on the back. Now, there are certain conditions behind when and how you can play a card face down as a magenta 5. The first big thing to keep in mind is that you can never have more than one magenta 5 played in a trick. So you can never have more than one card played face down in a trick. It can be played to follow a magenta card. So let's say, for example, this player leads out with a magenta 0. Now, you have to follow this magenta suit. So there are options here. This player has 2 magenta cards, but they also could play any of these cards they wanted to as a magenta 5 by playing it face down, because they're still following the magenta suit. But let's say instead, they actually might want to try to win this. So they play out their 8. The next player says, well, you know, I can beat that with a 9, I can beat that with a 12. Maybe I don't want to win this trick. I can maybe, if I want to short suit myself out of blue, maybe I'll just play this face down as a magenta 5, okay, because they are still following the magenta suit. Now this player doesn't have the option anymore to play a card face down as a magenta 5, and they also don't have an option but to win this trick. So maybe they say, okay, between 10 and 11, it's pretty close, so I'll just go ahead and I'll win with the 11. So, as normal, they would take this and they would put their 11 on top, and now they are 11 towards their 25 that they're trying to hit. So we already saw one example of when a card can be played down face down as a magenta card. When someone leads magenta, you can play a card face down to follow that suit, even if it's not a magenta card, playing it face down. That's one way to do it. Whoever leads out a trick, so for example, if this player had just won that trick and they're leading out, maybe there's a card in their hand that they don't necessarily want to have, perhaps because they already have played a high number. They could lead out any card as a magenta 5, and then everyone would have to follow that magenta suit. No one else would be able to play a magenta 5. So that's a second way that you can play a magenta card. You can also play a card face down as a magenta 5. You can also play a card face down as a magenta 5 if you don't have whatever the lead suit was. So perhaps, you know, it wouldn't apply in this case, but let's say they had no trump. Someone had led a trump. They don't have any, they can then play any card that they want face down as a magenta 5. And then the last way to do it is the most tricky way. So let's say, for example, that this player had led a blue 11. Let's change that. Let's make it a green anything. Let's say they had led with a green 10. Okay, well that works for the description here. If you are ever in a situation where you only have one card left of the lead suit, you may then play that card face down as a magenta 5. So in that case, they could have followed that 10 with a magenta 5 because it was the last green card in their hand. So those are the 4 ways that you can play a card face down as a magenta 5. Normally, it's a must-follow game, keeping in mind again that the silver suit is a trump suit and works as trump does in most trick-taking games, meaning that it's going to have a higher ranking than any non-trump suit. All right, so you're going to play through until all the cards have been played, trying to get as close as possible to 25 without going over. As I mentioned, scoring would be whoever gets closest to 25 gets 3 points, second closest 2, third closest 1. Any players that bust have to pay it out to the player that got closest to 25. If there are tied players, then those chips will go into the middle, into the kitty for the next round. And then whoever has the most of these points at the end of 4 rounds is the winner of 5s. Let's head back and I'll let you know what I think. All right, so there you have it. That is 5s, a trick-taking game with a couple of interesting twists, things that you kind of expect from this designer. Taiki Shinzawa has created a number of trick-taking games, and they usually have some hook, sometimes more than one, to make it stand apart from other games in the trick-taking genre. The first thing that I feel like I need to discuss in this review is about the components and the packaging of this game, 5 specifically, and maybe a little bit more about this Magenta line that this is part of. So there were 4 games initially in this Magenta line, and they have said, they being the publisher CMYK, that there will be more games in this line. And so 5s was part of the first 4. There are certain elements of this line that I think are going to be divisive. And I think it's already shown to be divisive just based on some online comments. And keep in mind, these have not been out very long. So I would not say that there's a large sample size of comments out there yet. So one thing that has been pointed out is that, wow, this is a really large box size for what is essentially a card game, okay? And so inside the box, you've got the cards here, and here you've got the bag filled with those point chips that I showed you. And then in the inner kind of cover, you've got the rule book that goes inside of a nice little sleeve there. So could this box have been smaller? Absolutely. No question. And I have in the past, in different settings, in top 10s and such, talked about how I would like to see box sizes getting smaller, not larger. So I stipulate those things. The other thing, though, is that I feel like this line of games, from what I can tell, at least from the first 4 games, many of them being quite approachable and not terribly complex, that I don't necessarily know that this is being marketed strictly to the hobby gamer, okay? I think these games are going to be appealing to people that maybe play some card games, might have a few games in their collection, but having a line of games that have a unified look, as these all do, having the numbers on the boxes, which, you know, back in the day, Aaliyah kind of got a bit of a reputation for having a numbered line of their games. And that was very appealing to a lot of people that, you know, like to have a particular look on their shelves, a unified look. I think that this is what they were going for here. I think they are going for a very particular look, a very particular aesthetic, and the box sizes all being slightly larger than a normal card box size was intentional. They have gone in public and have mentioned that this was a very measured choice that they made. They probably realized there'd be some backlash to this. My personal opinion is that for a line of games like this, I don't mind publishers swinging for the fences, and I really think that's what they did here. This is a very bold look. This bright magenta, and all of the games look like this, some even more colorful than this particular game. But they're going for a particular aesthetic, and I appreciate it. I particularly like it. Others might not, but I don't fault a publisher for kind of going for it and swinging for the fences and trying to create something that has a unique aesthetic. So that's my personal opinion on some of the things that I've seen that are somewhat maybe controversial, although again, this is pretty early on in this product's development or cycle being out there within the public. So a couple of things I do kind of want to mention, though, is that in 5s in particular, with it being a trick-taking game where you're going to have the cards held in hand and you're going to be splaying those cards, this is what are called single index cards, okay? Single index cards meaning that the number is, other than the large number on the card, is only displayed on the upper left of the card here. Whereas dual index cards would have the same number over here. You could have quad index cards that has the number all the way around the card, so that pretty much no matter which way you splay the cards, you're going to be able to see the number in a smaller size along the edges of the card, because when you have many cards in hand, you have 13 of these at the beginning of a hand, you're not going to really be able to see the big number very easily. And this can be a problem for left-handed players. Now, I'm just going to go ahead and put it out there. I'm a left-handed player. I'm left-handed, but I grew up, I suppose, playing card games and just naturally splayed them the way that a right-handed player would. So for me, this is not an issue at all, personally. But I have to acknowledge that this is going to be an issue for a certain percentage of players. Maybe not a large percentage, but it is something that I feel pretty easily could have been addressed. It would have been nice to have a dual index card. I really don't see why I don't think it makes the card look any less clean or elegant than it already does. So I think it would have been nice if they had dual indexed the cards. The other thing that I do want to say is that my particular copy, I feel like may have had a bit of issues with the cards. In that, I mean that from the very beginning, the edges of the cards were already looking a little bit haggard. And since these are cards where the colors go to the very end, if there's whitening or slight chipping on the ends of the card, it's going to be very noticeable. And that's the case here. But I want to make it very clear. It was like that from the beginning, from getting out of the box. So if you noticed it in the overview, because it was easily noticeable in the overview, I believe that I just got a deck of cards that maybe weren't cut perfectly or had some kind of an issue. I don't think this is going to be the case for everybody. And the reason why I feel pretty confident about that is that I got this game with the rest of the Magenta line. So I have 3 other games in this line. None of the cards in those games had this issue. I'm going to chalk this up to maybe I just got kind of an off deck of cards, but I wanted to mention that because I could see that being something you may have noticed in the overview. Overall, I find the card quality to be good. Again, I have some issues with the edges of my copy of the game. I don't think that's going to be a widespread thing. The cardboard chips that are in this game, 2 of the games in this initial 4-game lineup have point chips. The other 2 just have cards. But these point chips are great. They're super thick, very kind of fun to pick up. They almost don't feel like cardboard. They're so substantial. So very nice job there. I think the packaging looks very nice personally. I like the idea of this. And I said, you're taking a chance with it, but I like it. It does raise the price. That's something you have to keep in mind, is that the prices for these are going to be slightly higher than if they were just small box card games. So there's pros and cons to this approach, but I feel like they're very good quality, really look nice. There's also one thing I feel like I should mention is that the card sizes are not exactly standard. So if you are a card sleever, that's something you may want to keep in mind, is that you may have to kind of go beyond some of the more obvious card sleeve sizes out there and maybe be okay with having a little bit of extra sleeve on the top of your cards to accommodate for this. And they probably aren't going to fit in the insert either. So those are some things I just wanted to put out there. Some pros, some cons with the production. Normally I wouldn't spend this much time on the production, but it has been a big talking point in all of the discussions I've seen about this line of games. So I felt like I should address it with my opinion. Let's get to the gameplay. That's really what matters, okay? And I love this design. I absolutely adore it. Now, I have not really come across a Taiki Shinzawa game that I just out and out disliked. There are some that I like more than others, for sure. But I think that at their best, Taiki Shinzawa is, if not the best, then certainly up there with the best trick-taking designers ever that I've come across. And I've played a number of trick-taking games at this point. And while this is not my favorite Taiki Shinzawa game, it's in the upper tier for me. So the hooks in the game, I think, are great. The idea that every card can potentially be a 5 of the Magenta suit. It's weird, it's wacky, but it's not so weird and wacky that people are just like, what? A couple of Taiki's games are like that. Ghosts of Christmas is a very good example. At least that's the new version of the game, where you are essentially playing 3 tricks simultaneously. That's a what type of a game where you really have to wrap your mind around it. This is a neat hook, but it's not so complex that people that have played trick-taking games can't get it after maybe a couple of hands of play. So really neat. I also like the way that you are aiming to get as close to 25 as possible by, adding up the sum of whatever the top card that you won your tricks with. It's really, really an interesting idea. It leads to some kind of very interactive moments where, if someone comes out super aggressively and wins with a 13, and then maybe a couple of rounds later wins with a 10, and they're sitting there at 23. Other players are going to try to make that player bust. There's no question about it, right? It's just, you've put yourself out there on a limb, and you got to know that if you're going to do that, then players are going to come after you. So I think that's great. I also like that the way and the timing of how you could potentially play a face down card as a Magenta 5 can really throw players' plans into a lurch, where they think they have a pretty good idea of how a trick is going to go. Sometimes how and when those Magenta 5s are played can really, really throw a spanner in the works, and those can be very, very fun and kind of at moments at the table, for lack of an actual worded response there. So overall, I really, really love the design. I like kind of the 2 hooks that the game has. It keeps it feeling fresh. It does make it stand out in the trick-taking realm, but it's not so complex that I feel like I have to really be careful about who I'm teaching it to. Certainly, I wouldn't teach this as a first trick taker or a second trick taker, but if people have played, trick-taking games, a few times, maybe a couple of different types, then I would certainly be happy to show them 5s and think that they would feel pretty much in understanding of what's happening within a couple of hands. So overall, there's production pros and cons for me that I laid out in pretty good detail at the beginning. The design itself, I think, is terrific. I'm coming down on 5s with an 8. I'm coming with an 8. I think this had the potential to be 8.5 and outstanding, but there are a couple of production things that I really do. Mostly the indexing. I think that is something that very easily could have been addressed, and just for the sake of making it as accessible to as many players as possible, could have been a very easy change that I don't think would have really messed with the aesthetic of the game very much. So I really think that was a miss, and that did factor in to the final score. But look, it may not be an issue for you. The box size may or may not be an issue for you, but I'd hate for you to not play this game because you may have a couple of issues with production choices, because it's a great game. And quite honestly, I do think it's a beautiful looking product. So an 8. It's a game I heartily recommend. There are a couple of things that I kind of feel were obvious misses that I wish had been addressed, but overall, this is just a great game. I'm thrilled that I now have a copy of this game that was so hard to get a hold of before, and I'm also very excited that more people will get a chance to play a really stellar trick-taking game like this. All right, well, that's going to do it for me. This is Mike DiLisio signing off from the Dice Hour Midwest Annex.
Hey everybody, thanks for watching this video. If you like this review or whatever you just watched, wasn't it amazing? Check out our channel, Dice Tower. We have all kinds of things. We review games, we do top 10s, we play games live. It's all about board games, but especially the people who play them. Check out Dice Tower YouTube channel.